It's the Real News Network. I'm Nomi Prins coming to you from Baltimore. On the 7th of October, WikiLeaks started releasing thousands of emails which were apparently hacked from the email account of John Podesta, the chairman of Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. John Podesta was also former chief of staff to President Bill Clinton and special advisor to current President Barack Obama, where he worked until 2015. Among the many thousands of emails recently released by WikiLeaks, known as the Podesta emails, it includes articles written by journalist Nomi Prins, including one titled, "The Clintons and Their Banker Friends." Well, joining us today to speak about the WikiLeaks and Hillary Clinton's relationship to Wall Street is Nomi Prins. Nomi Prins is a journalist and author of 6 books, including most recently, All the President's Bankers, The Hidden Alliances That Drive American Power, published by Nation Books. Nomi, so good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
So, Nomi, you also have an article this week out in Tom Dispatch called "Waking Up in Hillary Clinton's America, Wall Street in the Saddle." Well, that is a good into this discussion. Give us a sense of what we have thus far uncovered about Hillary Clinton's alliances to Wall Street and what we can expect when we wake up on November 9th.
Well, first of all, for Hillary Clinton, the long answer to that would take us hours. The short answers, a couple of things. There are the historical relationships, of course, that the Clintons have had since Bill Clinton ran in the early 90s, which joined into Goldman Sachs in particular. One of his major campaign contribution organizers was Robert Rubin, who was a co-CEO of Goldman Sachs. As a thank you for doing that for Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton appointed him his Treasury Secretary. Under Robert Rubin is when a lot of deregulation discussion with Congress happened relative to the banking sector, which ultimately led to the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which had separated the risky banks' activities from people's deposits and loans. It wasn't repealed while Robert Rubin was there in the Clinton administration. It was repealed just after he left the Clinton administration to join Citigroup, which is one of the big 6 banks in the United States, and of course one of the banks that most benefited from that piece of deregulation that happened under the Bill Clinton administration. If we fast forward just a little bit to Hillary Clinton and pass through Obama, we see, for example, that Jack Lew, who is the current Treasury Secretary of the United States under Obama, came into Washington through Hillary Clinton. Actually, he was originally her deputy Secretary of State while she was Secretary of State. She picked him from Citigroup. Jack Lew had been working at Citigroup during the financial crisis in a part of Citigroup that was very instrumental in being involved in the cause of that crisis. Afterwards, he went into Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State Department, and now he's currently the Treasury Secretary. So that's just one example of multi-decades of ties between the people that run the political financial elements of this country and that have connections through both Clintons, not just Bill Clinton, not just deregulation, not just the ideology of regulation, but through Hillary Clinton, through Goldman Sachs, through Citigroup. Those are just 2 men, 2 banks, 2 presidents with one in between. And well, one coming up depending on what happens in November 8th. The WikiLeaks files that were dumped recently, they show some of the commentary that Hillary Clinton has made, in particular at speeches to Goldman Sachs. Again, very instrumental in our legislation, in power in Washington, in the Clintons' world in general, which really indicated her friendship with that organization and her viewing what Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street power brokers do as being sort of intrinsic to regulation, i.e. they made some mistakes, but she still believes and had told them during these speeches in so many words that they could regulate themselves. She didn't say it like that. She just said that regulators in the future should come from these organizations because they know the financial industry best. Of course, they also wreck the financial system, but she did not say that to them.
Right. And we know from what President Obama inherited in terms of the economic depression we went into, actually his entire reign here as president, we've been suffering the consequences of that. And if we now believe that Hillary Clinton as president is also going to be continuing her relationships with Wall Street and letting it regulate itself, are we to then believe that all of what she's saying in her campaign about being tough on Wall Street is a lot of BS?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very populist opinion, and a populist way of stating things, I should say. It's not necessarily her opinion. It's what she needs to say. And it's interesting that since Bernie Sanders left the race, she's really changed and reduced her rhetoric against Wall Street and pro any kind of more tighter regulation on Wall Street. She has said she has a plan that's better than Dodd-Frank, which was the plan that Obama introduced in 2010 in the wake of the financial crisis that supposedly was going to contain systemic risk from the banking system on the rest of Main Street going forward. The reality is it's a bill with a lot of lobbyist language in it. I did the analysis of the number of lines versus the number of things that are actually relevant, and it's something like 8%, and everything else is 92% that negates the 8% that could be helpful. So what it has not done is made the big banks smaller. They're 30% larger in terms of the assets and therefore the power that they have than they were before the crisis. So that's what's happened under the Obama administration. Hillary Clinton hasn't addressed that. In fact, another thing that's evident from the WikiLeaks emails, the Podesta emails, is that there was a conversation internally within her advisory group where they were discussing before she wrote an op-ed in December 2015 about what she would do to regulate Wall Street that showed up in the New York Times on December 7th, 2015, whether or not they should even mention this idea of banks being 30% bigger, which was something Elizabeth Warren was saying, and so forth, and they agreed not to do that. And so this was kind of what was really happening. Now, what she had said during the post-Bernie having left the campaign period to try and, I think, get Bernie's supporters onto her side was that she would be tougher. Now, subsequently in the debates with Donald Trump, as the only candidate from the Democratic Party at the top of the ticket, she's really watered down and almost not even mentioned Wall Street or regulation or any of that nature. And it hasn't really come up in the debates. It came up in the first debate in a very minor way, the words Wall Street. They didn't even show up in the other two debates. So it wasn't something she was going to push herself. It wasn't something that was asked. And so I believe that's where we're really at. You know, if you look at the actual events of her discussions of Wall Street regulation, that's where we're at. When the Wells Fargo scandal popped up recently, and John Stump, who was the CEO of Wells Fargo, ultimately resigned with a very nice golden parachute from that resignation, and 5,300 employees of Wells Fargo were basically fired for creating fake accounts and making millions of dollars off creating these fake accounts. She did write a letter that was on her website to the customers of Wells Fargo, basically saying they should take responsibility. Individuals should be held accountable, but she never mentioned him by name. Again, that's much more telling than her saying generally people should be accountable. There was an actual person, a real person with a real name, who said he was accountable in front of real Congress, and she couldn't even mention his name. So I think that gives us more of an indication of where she's really at.
Right. And Nomi, in the article you wrote, you explain why it is that you believe Hillary Clinton's America could mean 4 years, you say, of an economic dystopia. What did you mean by that?
Well, two things. One is that because the foundations of Wall Street haven't been changed, in other words, these big six banks are bigger than they were before, the regulation or the Dodd-Frank Act that was labeled regulation to reduce the risk to them, from them, that they could be causing in a potentially second leg of a financial crisis, were not really reduced. So if you don't structurally change something, if you don't break up the complexity, the inability to appropriately regulate the size of these institutions, if you don't actually hold the CEOs accountable who were running, or in some cases still running, these institutions, despite the fact that these are institutions that have been fined, that have copped to, in some cases, felony charges, that have paid billions of dollars because of settlements with the Department of Justice and the SEC and so forth. If those don't change, and in fact are subsidized instead by the government, which they really have been in terms of being able to stay afloat, they're not going to in and of themselves try to contain what they do going forward. They're just trying to get away with what they can get away with in whatever the market environment currently is. But it doesn't mean that the things that they structure, the types of toxic assets and so forth at the core of the crisis, they can still create all those same things again. They might not have subprime loans in them, they might have something else in them, but the mechanism for doing what they did is still intact. Their size is larger than before the crisis. And we're also 7-8 years into a policy from the Federal Reserve that has helped to subsidize them by having zero rates. So effectively making the cost of money that they need for themselves to speculate cheaper. So we're really starting at a position where if we have a crisis, it's going to be much more dangerous to the rest of the economy. Aside from that, in the last 8 years, the economy, even though some numbers do look better, inequality numbers and social mobility numbers, which are really what I look at to indicate financial security amongst real citizens, don't look that good. So you have a situation where there's more inequality, there's less social mobility, there's a lot of debt throughout I'm not talking about the government debt, but debt in terms of what people have taken on during this period. And if you add to that a potential financial crisis, we're looking at some real problems, particularly if nothing has foundationally been altered.
Right. Nomi, in your article, you also discuss numerous examples of this thing called revolving door between high-level governmental positions and Wall Street. And recently, I think there was a Citibank WikiLeaks that basically prescribed the people that President Obama should appoint back before he was even elected. What do we know about this so far in terms of the revolving door effect related to Hillary Clinton's potential presidency?
Well, there's, as I mentioned before, there's Jack Lew, who is the current Treasury Secretary. Of course, he came. He originally was part of Bill Clinton's administration. He was actually a sort of junior advisor to Bill Clinton back in 1993, and he basically cycled through different posts, and he ultimately came into Citigroup, and from Citigroup he went into being Deputy Secretary of State for Hillary Clinton, and then now Treasury Secretary. So that's a big loop. In terms of Goldman Sachs, there's another person, Gary Gensler, who was involved in Bill Clinton's administration, who was also involved. He was the Deputy Secretary of Domestic Affairs. Which relates a lot to domestic finance and the economy back in the Bill Clinton administration. Subsequently, he was also part of Obama's administration in terms of running the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which is the commission that actually relates to the types of derivatives that banks can trade, some of the open market ones. And then he also is potentially one of the key picks for being the Treasury Secretary for Hillary Clinton. He's also a former partner of Goldman Sachs. There's been different comments about him that he actually is a bit more pro-regulation than some other people that might have taken his path in terms of his career. But again, that remains to be seen. He was certainly involved with the first Clinton administration in terms of a lot of deregulation they had done, and he's certainly been a part of Goldman Sachs. So it's hard to know what he's actually going to do and if he gets that position, but he's certainly someone who is in the running, and it's been discussed as being in the running for a position as a Treasury Secretary or something like that in a Hillary Clinton administration.
All right. I mean, I know we could go on talking for hours about these connections, but I thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.